Tonight's class is co-sponsored by David and by Slava. Thank you. To sponsor a class, it's $360. If you want to sponsor half a class, it's also an option. This is what keeps it going, guys. This is not a for-profit organization. Everything is for the people, by the people. And Baruch Hashem, over the last couple of years, the Tanya has become a self-sustaining class from the people that enjoy it. So it means the world every time one of you steps up and gives from the heart. It goes straight to other Jews' stomachs and souls. I want to start tonight with something controversial. Because controversial always is a good hook. There is a piece of the Zohar that describes what it is that our Yetzer Hara tries to do. How do we understand the job and the personality of the evil inclination? And the Zohar says the best way to illustrate what the Yetzer Hara is to use the metaphor of the prostitute. It's in chapter 9, mentioned, but I'm talking about it tonight as we begin chapter 7. What is the metaphor of the prostitute? The metaphor of the prostitute basically is that there was a king who had a son who he was raising and grooming to become the next successor in line of the royal family. But at a certain point, he wanted to test his son's character and to make sure that he's dealing with a man of integrity who's going to be able to withstand personal tests for the greater good. And so what he does is he hires a prostitute to seduce him. And basically the question on the table is, will the son give in or not? So it's at the king's behest. The king is setting up the son. And the hope is that the son doesn't give in to the temptation, but there's always the possibility that he might. And of course, if he fails, he's proven his lack of worthiness, but if he perseveres, his status is elevated and he becomes fit to be the king. The question is, or the hard part of the metaphor is, what does the prostitute play? On the one hand, she wants to play herself to the best of her ability because the king hired her to do what she does best. On the other hand, she's hired by the king. She doesn't want the son to fail. She knows what the mission is. She knows this is just a test, a stepping stone to see if we can get the son to graduate to the next level. So she's kind of in a tough spot. You're telling her to act the part, but she's really hoping against hope that she's not going to succeed. That, says the Zohar, is the Yetzer Hara, in a nutshell. The Yetzer Hara is God's agent to test his only son. It's a setup. God just wants to see if we're going to give in to the temptation or not. And the Yetzer Hara has the toughest part of them all to play, because he needs to both exercise the power of enticement, persuasion, and all those good stuff, and at the same time, he needs to really hope that it doesn't work. That's the Zohar. And there's a commentary on the Zohar that says we need to pick apart this metaphor to understand it better. Why does the king need to hire a prostitute to do the seduction? Why can't he do the seduction himself? Well, obviously that's a ludicrous question. It's beneath the king. It's completely beneath the king. He needs to therefore hire somebody from the outside whose job it is anyways to do this kind of stuff. This is her line of business. So that all the pieces can be set up in place properly. Now, if you think about it, can the prostitute do her job in the king's presence? If the king were to hire her and say, here's my son, go, do your thing, I'm watching. That wouldn't work either. Why? On two counts. First of all, the son would never be persuaded. The father's influence is right in the room, it's right there. Secondly, she couldn't perform to her best with other people in the room. So clearly, the metaphor takes place outside of the king's presence. She's hired by the king, they leave the king's presence, and now she's meant to do what she does. If she's, that's the way they word it, but if she's an honest or in tune prostitute, even once she leaves the king's presence, she will not be able to do her job successfully. Forget the fact that she's hoping the son will prevail. Even in the prelude, knowing as she does that it's a setup and she's hired by the king, it makes it very hard to act. It makes it very hard to play the part. So therefore, there's a commentary on the Zohar that says that the true meaning of this metaphor has a little bit more links. What happens is, after the prostitute leaves the king's presence, she then hires another prostitute. Oh, wow. She says, look, I got a job for you. I can't do this job because my mind is a little bit twisted on this. I need you to go into the room and do the seduction of this prince. Once you get to the next link in the chain, the second prostitute is further removed from the first. Therefore, she feels the importance and the weight of the mission less. And it's easier to focus on the mundane, practical side of things. What happens if she too feels that there's too much awareness? She knows she's let in on the plot and she can't do her job. She might hire another one. And so on the chain might go until the actual prostitute who's dealing with the prince is so far away from the original mission that she's forgotten completely, or perhaps doesn't even know at all that the king is involved, and is only focused on seducing the prince. And the commentary on the Zohar says that this deeper understanding of the metaphor is the deeper understanding of the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara exists on different levels in parallel universes together. Perhaps initially, at the highest, most refined level, the forces of evil are let in on the plot, in tune with the fact that there's a Jew who's the son of the king, precious to the king, the test carries meaning, and there's a hope to have the son, elevate and refine his character. And indeed, that Yetzer Hara says, I don't want to do this job. I'm not comfortable. I can't see the mission through because I'm too close to the king.
Well, it's something that just popped in my head that's highly obvious, I guess. If you're taking Yetzer Hara as gossip or idle talk or whatever, it's much easier to speak ill of people that we don't know. Unfortunately, a lot of people take pleasure in bashing and speaking against people that they don't know. When it's a friend or a relative or someone that you know, there's going to be a natural conflict as to, I don't know if I should tell you this, I don't know if I should say
Very
this.
true.
So let me think about it. Whereas if it's someone else, you're like, oh my God, I wouldn't believe what I heard. And
Very true.
And there's no,
You don't feel the consequences.
Right.
It's a very good practical application of the metaphor. We see this on social media more than ever. Even with people that we know, you won't tell them to their face things that you'll write them on text, right?
Yeah. The screen is a filter.
That's it.
Yeah.
As soon as there's a filter, you feel further removed from the consequences of your actions, and you don't care so much to be blunt, harsh, negative, etc. But back to the point. The Yetzer Hara above says, that's not for me. So he hires a lower level Yetzer Hara. He says, hey, here's another force. You go do the job. At that point, again, there's the filter, and the filter removes the second level Yetzer Hara from the first. So that in a way, you have what we call the more noble Yetzer Hara and the less noble Yetzer Hara, the more crude Yetzer Hara. And then if the forces of evil continue to descend further and further through further and further filters, at the end of the day, when the Yetzer Hara down here administers the test, and that's where the test happens. The test happens in this world. This is the arena where we face our inner demons or our desires, or our lusts, or our cravings, or our temptations. When we face that power of enticement, what we may not realize is that that power is so far removed from its original intention that actually all it may know is the experience that it's trying to get us to have. There is no more noble intentions.
But it's noble to actually test the case. Like the nobility also comes from actually executing the test objectively. In other words, there's somehow this
If you're able to.
inverse logic here that says the further away you are from the setup or the entrapment, the less noble you are. But in some sense, the more noble you are because you're doing the test sort of without any interference from the original intention, right?
I would say the more noble the test is,
yes.
but not the more noble you are.
Sure. That's
Because,
what I mean.
yeah.
But so the test is administered more objectively.
It's true.
further away you
That's
are
true.
from the intention.
So from kind of like from God's perspective almost, he would rather this chain reaction take place where the test is administered on the fullest level, because then she can actually act, the prostitute or the Yetzer Hara, like a real prostitute or like a real Yetzer Hara. That's true. But in terms of the forces of evil themselves, they lose their credibility or their purity or their pristineness as they descend further and further from the original intention.
The prince and the Yetzer Hara is just two halves of the same thing. So if he says no to her, even no matter how far removed it is, that's the noblest of all.
That's true.
Because he's,
That is true.
Stranger,
Yes, I forgot to mention that.
This is the same person. This is the Yetzer Hara and you and the Yetzer Tov. The same
That's true. That's true. That same commentary on the Zohar makes it clear that at the end of the day, when the test is administered at the fullest level of detachment, if he refuses it, the victory is that much greater because it was a real, true victory. Yes. And that's the key to the metaphor, or the application of the metaphor as it applies in our reality. We are living in the space where the prostitute has gone furthest from the king. The forces of evil that we have to face down in this reality are the ones that have completely lost touch with their original mission. That's why the world, as we learned last week, or 2 weeks ago it was, is called the world of Klippa, the world of the shell. Because like a shell, it covers the fruit, it doesn't allow the fruit to be seen, and it actually makes a case for complete denial of the existence of the fruit. The world becomes the great covering for anything godly. Yet, chapter 7 begins with the fact that there's a little bit of hope. There's a little bit of hope in this reality because the klipa, the shell that we experience in this world, can be divided into two categories. There are two kinds of klipa. The first kind of shell is the opaque one, the totally evil one, which we learned about last time we had a class. The irredeemable, unholy, evil stuff. And those are the space, I guess, where, it's really gotten the furthest from the king. But then we have what's called klipas noga, the translucent shell. And that's the topic of chapter 7, the translucent shell. Let's put it in perspective. We have things that are godly, inherently holy. A mitzvah action, that's holy. You wear tefillin, that's holy. You eat matzah, that's holy. On the other end of the extreme, we have violations of God's will. You desecrate the Shabbos, totally evil. You eat non-kosher, totally evil. Then we have the middle. The middle is the translucent stuff. What are those translucent stuff? What are the things in this world that on the one hand have distanced themselves from the king, have become a team player on the prostitute's team, but yet allow in some light, like a translucent screen. Sometimes you have like a window, right, where it doesn't allow the images through, but it allows the light through. Which things in the world are related to this middle ground? That's where chapter 7 begins, and that's the part that I want to read with you inside. We always try to do a little bit of reading in the Tanya, so I have 2 extra books if there's no, if someone's missing. We're going to look at page 92. 92, the very first word of the chapter, ach. Ach in Hebrew means however, or but. Says the Alter Rebbe, let's read a couple of paragraphs inside. But, in contrast to the things mentioned at the end of the previous chapter, which are derived from the completely impure klipos, the following are derived from bright klipa. That's how he calls it. Okay, we're calling it the translucent one, the bright klipa. A, the energizing animal soul in Israel, from bright klipa, which is embodied in your blood, as stated above, chapter 1. So the animal soul that we've been talking so much about, the godly soul, the animal soul itself is a manifestation of the bright klipa. B, the souls of kosher cattle, animals, birds, and fish, which are permissible to eat. Bright klipa being the sustenance and life force of everything that is permissible to eat from the mineral and vegetable worlds. So everything besides for the human. Kosher animals, kosher birds, kosher fish. And look how he translates it. Everything that is permissible to eat from the mineral and vegetable worlds. If you read the Hebrew, that may be not a fully accurate translation. There's a debate in the commentaries of the Tanya how to translate this line. Because the way he translated it, it seems like there are things that are permissible to eat from the mineral worlds, and there are things that are forbidden to eat from the mineral worlds. But the truth is, on the mineral level, everything is permitted. So, huh?
Who eats minerals?
And who eats minerals in general?
Who eats
Well, vitamins.
Yeah, the minerals are in food.
Salt is
Yeah.
salt's one thing.
Salt is one thing.
Potassium, I mean, there are minerals in every,
Yes. So actually, if you read the Hebrew, if you look at that line there, it says, V'kiyum v'chayut kol hadomem. You have to put a comma after the word hadomem. The life force of everything inanimate. Period. V'chol hatzomeach hamutar ba'achila. And all vegetable things that are permitted. In other words, so long as you're in the human or the animal or the vegetable kingdom, there are divisions. Kosher elements, non-kosher elements. Kosher birds, animals, fish, non-kosher birds, animals, fish. Kosher plants and fruit, non-kosher plants and fruit. There are non-kosher plants and fruit. Like we learned yesterday, the first 3 years of a fruit's growth is called orla. You plant a mixture of plants. The plants that grow is forbidden. There are different types of non-kosher plants and fruits. But when it comes to the mineral level, nature at its core, there is no such thing as prohibited. All mineral is from the bright klipa. So that's just my little piece of commentary there. So we have A, the animal soul. B, all the animal kingdom, vegetable kingdom, mineral kingdom. C, this is an interesting one. Bright klipa is also the sustenance and life force of every worldly act, spoken word or thought that has no trace of religious prohibition in neither root nor branch from the 365 prohibitions and their offshoots, biblical and rabbinic. There's no problem with the act, with the thought, with the speech. Why is such an activity, next page, considered to be from klipa, the dark energy of the universe, if it is not prohibited in any way by the Torah? What's making it problematic is only this activity is not carried out for the sake of heaven. Rather, it is motivated by the body's will, its desire, and lust. That puts it in the middle. There's nothing problematic on a Torah level. He said, not the branches nor the offshoots, nothing. But it's motivated by desire, temptation, and lust, and not by a will to serve Hashem.
How do you separate that?
Okay, we'll see. But first I want to make the point. Skip the paragraph of commentary, go to the next paragraph. Says the Alter Rebbe even further. A kosher activity will strengthen klipa even if it is a real bodily need for continued living. So long as your intention is not for the sake of heaven, namely to worship God at a later point using your body. Radical stuff. The Alter Rebbe has a high standard. So again, to repeat, what's godly is godly. That's undebatable. What's evil is evil. That's also undebatable. But then we have the middle ground. The middle ground are all those things that on a basic level carry a permissibility, but they may or may not be done with the proper intentions. And the principle applies universally whether or not it's a basic necessity or a non-basic necessity. As the commentators on the Tanya explain, it's like within food, right? You say food, it would fit right into this category. Eating breakfast, it's not a godly act, it's not an evil act, it's just a bodily act. And you can eat breakfast motivated by lust and desire. You can eat breakfast motivated by a real godly motivation. But breakfast can be divided into two categories. What do you have to have for breakfast? You have to have bread and water in your system. You don't have to have eggs and butter and cheese and salad and all the great stuff, the lasagna, whatever it is you have for breakfast, right? So it's easier for me to understand if you say that all the side dishes could go one way or the other. Well, what about bread and water? Bread and water is the basic necessities. Says the Alter Rebbe, this is how it works Kabbalistically. Kabbalistically speaking, and therefore, as a Hasidic Jew, or as a Tanya following Jew, practically speaking, these are things that fall into the category of Klipat Noga. And the fascinating thing about this middle ground is that here, all that matters is the intent, as we're going to develop in this class and the next. Intention becomes the key factor. When you're on the two sides of the spectrum, intent doesn't matter. It's a very interesting thing. People may not know this. If you went to a Jew and you gave him matzah on the night of the Seder, and he had no idea it was Passover, he had no idea what matzah is, he didn't even make a blessing. He just ate the matzah. The act itself, because it's godly, gets him brownie points. He did a mitzvah. Same thing, by the way, on the other side, even though it doesn't get you punished, but the sin, the violation of God's will, happens regardless of whether you know about it or not. So if you ate a piece of non-kosher meat, even if you didn't know it wasn't kosher or anything like that, even if you ate a small amount, usually you have to get punishment, you have to eat a big amount, like an olive-sized portion, an ounce. You ate less than an ounce, you violated God's will. It's the act that matters. When you're on the two sides of the spectrum, it's the act that matters, not the intention.
So if I went to a McDonald's and that guy threw on a piece of kosher burger and he gave it to me, I'm good to go. The intention wasn't to be kosher, it ended up being kosher on my plate.
Oh, you're saying the other way, yeah. Yeah, the other way would be where because only the act matters, if you didn't do the act, you're scot-free. Even if you intended. That's a true point. But once you move to the middle, it's like a bicycle. And what do they always say? Life is like a bicycle. If you're not going up, you're going down. You never heard that before? Oh, okay. Huh?
You have to be moving to stay balanced.
Or that's another way of saying it. Yeah, with the bike, you have to always be moving, because the second you stop moving, you're going to fall. So the bike itself, in the metaphor, right, can go both ways. But it has to go one of the ways. It can't stay neutral. So while it is neutral inherently, it cannot stay neutral. So the same is with Klipat Noga. Klipat Noga, the starting point is neutral. All these things that we said, the animal soul and the kosher cow and the kosher gefilte fish and the kosher apple, or the act, the breakfast, the business meeting, they begin as neutral, but they cannot stay neutral. They have to fall to one of the sides. Or, to use the Alter Rebbe's description, they hold within them both sides, and you can choose which one to redeem, which one to manifest. Every middle ground object or concept holds within it both potentials. And you choose which direction it'll take. And the way you choose it is with your intention.
Question. So, is that implying that if your intention is, as it states, for the sake of heaven, you have to shut off the will and desire and lust, that's all going to be completely shut off? Or you elevate it by the intention? In other words, you can't really shut off internal feelings at that level.
Mm-hmm.
So does the intention for the sake of heaven do the job, or do you have to literally eliminate the motivation by the body's will, its desire and lust?
If I understand your question correctly, you're asking, can I eat a steak with godly intentions, but really enjoy it?
Yeah. Well, that's the idea.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, the answer is yes.
That's right. Yeah. Right.
God wants you.
The answer is yes, and the truth of it is, when you have a godly intention, your enjoyment becomes godly.
Okay.
That's the power of transforming Klipat Noga. The power of transforming the translucent Klipa is that when you have the right intention, it redeems the act. Easier said than done.
Obviously, a lot of mitzvahs, you do require the intention.
Which ones? For example, are you referring like?
Shema.
Okay, so you're hitting on something not discussed in the Tanya here, but in chapter 38, which we'll get to, God willing, with time. There's a unique position taken by actually the Alter Rebbe, author of the Tanya, not in his Kabbalistic works, but in his halachic works, that when you have a mitzvah which requires intention, the intention becomes the mitzvah. So for example, the classic case of this would be sukkah. Part of the mitzvah of sukkah is to sit in the sukkah and to be aware that the reason that you're sitting there is because God protected us with clouds of glory when we were in the desert. So then, it's not so much that the mitzvah requires intention, but that the intention is the mitzvah. The mitzvah is sit in the sukkah and think about the fact that God took us out of the desert, etc., etc. And then we're basically back to the main point, which is that when you're in the mitzvah area, so long as you're doing the act, in this case, including the intention, because that's part of the act, then it's a mitzvah.
It's like two separate, like the matzah also, right?
The matzah is different, because matzah there's
The intention and
there's clear indication that you don't have to have the intention of eating. But yeah, that's anyway. Without getting down the rabbit hole of that, in the chapter, the Alter Rebbe gives examples of what it's like to redeem the translucent klipa and what it's like to go the other way. So today, we're going to go with the positive side, and next week, we'll have to come a little bit inoculated because it's going to be harsh and a little bit rough. But this week we go with the good stuff. The Alter Rebbe gives two examples of using things properly that are neutral. And again, neutral means inherently neutral on the Klipat Noga side, but have to go one of two ways. Number one is eating. The first example he gives is eating. And he specifically chooses foods that are tougher to redeem or to have them fall on the godly side. Because he could have easily said, like I said before, bread and water, because those also are neutral and can fall on either side. But it's much easier to have a godly intention when you eat bread and water than, what he gives an example is, fatty meat and fragrant wine. Okay, and everybody translate fatty meat and fragrant wine for 2024's your personal definition. Whatever it is, that thing that you love, and your natural tendency is to embrace it on a lustful, temptational level. Those can be used in the wrong way, but using them in the right way would be one of the following examples. He says, eating or drinking to open the mind, to learn Torah better, is a way of using the Klipat Noga and elevating it. Brings an example from the Talmud. It's actually an exchange in the Talmud where there was a student who asked his teacher, Rava asked Rav Nachman, to explain him a certain law, in the laws of damages, theft. And he didn't answer. The next morning, first thing they walk into the study hall, he runs over to him, he gives him the answer. And he says, the reason that I didn't give you the answer last night at the end of the evening session was because I hadn't yet had fatty meat. I hadn't yet had fatty meat. So some commentaries on the Talmud would say, what he meant was that he was fasting. He was fasting that day. Fasting gets the mind a little bit woozy. So he needed to have dinner and then he can, be clear. But every word in the Talmud is exact. Why does he say fatty meat? Because I didn't eat dinner.
Yep.
There has to be something about the fatty meat. So the Kabbalists say that there's something in the properties of fatty meat that can open the mind. He didn't mean I didn't have dinner. He meant I didn't have that food that I typically use as my tool to opening my Torah mind. That's what I do. The only reason I eat this type of meat is for its property of opening the mind. Same thing with fragrant wine. There was apparently a custom, I don't know, it's not really common today, but they would mix herbs and spices into wine. And there was a fragrance that came along with the taste that also had this kind of an effect. Rava, actually, it's interesting that when you look into the Talmud, who said what? The same student who asked the question and got the answer from the teacher about eating meat, later on in his life, he said, wine and meat have made me smarter. It seems like he may have adopted this practice. In other words, this concept of eating for godly pursuits. By the way, just a parenthesis, there's a story in the beginning of the Torah where Yitzchak, Isaac, our forefather, Yitzchak, asked his son to prepare a meal. Va'aseli mat amim. Make me a meal, ba'avur tavarechecha nafshi, so that my soul can bless you before I die. Why the meal? You want to bless me? Bless me. Go, take him. Take your son into the room and give him a blessing. In 1968, there was a big rabbinic conference in Israel, and one of the rabbis got up and, as part of his speech, he mentioned that Yitzchak, like any good old man, needed a warm meal, a good dinner to get him going. The Rebbe took great offense at this declaration. The next Shabbos Farbringen, he came out and said, I don't want to say the man's name in public, but I have to protest for Yitzchak's honor. How could it be that somebody would say that Yitzchak, who the whole Judaism hinges on him, just was eating dinner for dinner? And the Rebbe then quoted the commentaries that explain that it was based on this point. A blessing, a true Torah blessing, is to take something from a higher level of reality and transform it into a lower level of reality. The word bracha, if you're familiar with Hebrew, bracha means hamshacha, to draw down. Every blessing already exists in a higher state of consciousness. The power of the blesser is to be able to take it from there down to this world. Esav, Yitzchak's older son, was kind of like the translucent klipa of our chapter. He was high energy and could go both ways. Yitzchak wanted to bless him. He wanted to imbue him with the power to be able to embrace his deepest potential and bring out his true good side. And for that, he needed the meal, the food which would open the mind in the Kabbalistic sense to allow for that blessing to come forth. In the end, what happened? Yaakov grabbed the opportunity. He said, my father is about to open up a new gate, a new portal of divine awareness. I'm going to be the one to facilitate it. And in the end, he got the blessings and Esav did not. And that part was never revealed till Mashiach comes. That's why Mashiach is described as the time when Edom, Esav, will be refined, because then the potential of even the deepest darkness will come out. But the point is that food has this power to open up a new channel. There's another way, by the way. to use food in a holy pursuit. And that, says the Alter Rebbe, is to eat on Shabbos and holidays for the sake of doing the mitzvah of enjoying Shabbos and holidays. There's a mitzvah. Kavod va'oneg Shabbat. You have to make Shabbat into an enjoyable day. And the Rambam describes that you're supposed to, he uses those words, basar shamin yayin yasham, fatty meat, vintage wine. So if you eat on Shabbos and holidays with the intention, notice those operative words. See, he doesn't say just eating and drinking on Shabbos and you're good. The eating and drinking has to be accompanied with the intent. And by the way, if you go to many homes of Orthodox Jews, it's not the custom in the Chabad community, but in many Ashkenazi communities, before either every dish or before every bite, the people of the house will say, Lekavod Shabbos Kodesh. I'm eating for the honor of Shabbat. I remember when I was in a house like that, and it was very profound. The master of the home was the father of was bringing he did every spoon he took, Lekavod Shabbos Kodesh, and he ate it. There was a sense of awareness of that I'm doing a holy thing right now, and I want to imbue it with that holiness. So before I take every bite, I say, this is for the honor of Shabbos. What happens if you don't? You just eat on Shabbos. Then we have the story of the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov was sitting once with the students on Shabbos, and he wanted to demonstrate what could happen if you eat without the wrong intent. And what he would do is, there's a couple of stories like this where he would ask his students who were seated around the table to put their hands on each other's shoulders, and when the chain was closed, everybody would behold a vision. There was a story of the fish. You ever heard that story? Just parenthetically, there was a guy in shul who came to his friend and something had happened between them, and he started screaming at him about some business deal that went sour. He said, I'll tear you up like a fish. And the Baal Shem Tov heard that and he paused. He asked his students to link in a circle, and they saw in a vision this man tearing up his friend like a fish. And the Baal Shem Tov said, every word you say in this world carries a significance in some parallel universe. What you say here carries extreme weight. There's an energy. So anyway, he's sitting on the Shabbos table. He wants to demonstrate what it looks like to eat on Shabbos without the proper intention. So he asked his students to put their hands on each other's shoulder, and they all beheld one of the students with the Shabbos clothes on, but the head was the head of an ox. An Ochsenstreimel, that's what it's called in the literature. An ox and a streimel. And he was saying, basically, when you eat animalistically, your spiritual mirror becomes animalistic. And the Rebbe once commented on this story. He's like, you see, everything is exact. They saw the streimel in the vision because that was being worn properly. He was doing the Shabbos clothing thing 100%. Only the face was transformed into the ox because that was where the problem was. You ate without the right intention, you become ox-like. Too much steak with the wrong intention, but with the right intention, it's redeemed. And the last example he gives of transforming something neutral into something holy is comedy, a joke. Judaism has what to say about jokes. You can say a joke for a holy purpose. What could be a holy purpose in a joke?
A rabbi, a priest,
And a minister walked into a bar.
Walk in the bar.
Exactly.
Well, it puts people at ease, it puts people in a good mood.
Yes.
Yeah.
Relaxes people.
The Talmud says that Rava, before he began his lecture, he would say a joke.
And
You
that
think
is
rabbis
a
saying jokes in their sermon? This is as old as the Talmud. Rava would say a joke at the beginning of his sermon to...
And there's a lesson in it.
And there is a lesson.
Yeah.
He would set the stage, and he would, like you say, put everybody at ease, open up their minds. A joke can do that. There's no shorter bridge between the people than a good laugh. And then you can approach the lecture with seriousness. The Talmud actually says, he would say the joke, the rabbis would laugh, and then they would sit with fear of heaven and learn Torah. That was the order. If you've ever been to a Chabad wedding, you'll see that in the beginning, there's a point where the groom recites a discourse, a mimer. Like if you've been to a Chabad bar mitzvah, they have the bar mitzvah mimer, the boy says a little discourse. At the wedding, there's a discourse. Yeah, you're drinking at the chavada. Yeah, you come for the later part. This is at the earlier part. There's a little Torah being discussed. So over there in the discourse that's traditionally recited at weddings, the Rebbe speaks about the power of this joke. He says it's like a father who lifts up a child in order to play. The playing is the moment of connection, is the real deal. But the lifting up, and sometimes the child mischievously grabs the father's beard. That's how we know you have to have a beard, by the way. Parentheses. Somebody once came by dollars. The Rebbe used to give out dollars every Sunday. And he asked the Rebbe for a blessing for children. The Rebbe said, you have to grow a beard. What's the kid going to grab onto? And he grew a beard and he had a child. So there's the two stages. So the joke is the same thing. The point is the learning. The learning is where it happens. But you have to have sometimes like a little hook.
Are any of these jokes recorded?
Rava's jokes?
Talmudic jokes?
I don't know if those jokes are recorded.
Well, the jokes never fell flat. The rabbis always laughed.
Rabbis always laughed. They were paid to laugh. So the question is what you do with the joke. What's the purpose of the joke? You know the joke about the Jew, the Hindu, and the politician?
No.
That went to stay overnight? They were traveling and they got stuck. They needed to go into a hotel for the night, so they came in and they say, we're 3 people, you have space for 3. He says, I'm sorry, I only have space for 2, but I also have a barn in the back. One of you can sleep in the barn. If you guys don't mind, that's fine. So they look at each other and they're like, listen, we'll make it work. So they go into the room. The Jew and the politician look at each other. They grab the beds. They tell the Hindu, you go to the barn. He goes, okay. They go to sleep. 10 minutes later, there's a knock at the door. It's the Hindu. What's going on? I can't sleep in the barn. There's a cow. There's a cow in the barn. Cows are sacred in the Hindu tradition.
Oh,
I can't sleep there. So someone else go into the barn. So the politician looks at the Jew, is like, you go. So the Jew goes, the Hindu and the politician go to sleep. 10 minutes later, there's a knock at the door. The Jew's there. What's going on? There's a pig in the barn. I can't. That doesn't make sense that the pig should sleep with the Jew. So, politician, he's got to go. He goes to the barn. 10 minutes later, there's a knock at the door. They open the door. The cow and the pig are standing there.
very particularly good time. That's a great one.
This.
Now I understand.
I should have said it in the beginning of the lecture. I didn't know.
Yes.
But in a way, this is the story of chapter 7. This is the story of Klipat Noga. Sometimes we go into the barn and we think that we have to fight what's there.
Yeah.
And if we can't fight what's there, then we have to leave the barn. The question is, can you find what has to be chased out of the barn, send that home, and then go and make use, even of the barns, for the holy things? You have a breakfast, you have a joke. It doesn't have to become an exercise in just feeding the animal soul. There's a way to transform it to make it godly. And when we do that, we've done our mission. Because we've taken that middle neutral thing, and instead of letting the bicycle go down, we've moved it up. L'chaim.